Well, we're going to look at 1 Peter chapter 4, beginning in verse 12. One of the characteristics of who we are is that we try to go back and just look at Scripture and try to discern what Scripture says. And so you don't find me using a book. And though I think it's wise from time to time to get counsel from other people and use commentaries, I have none. I don't ever look at anything. I kind of had this feeling, if it's plain, it'll be important. If it's not plain, it won't be so important, and surely I can figure it out. Now, in years gone by, I used to have access to a fellow who was a self-taught Greek scholar, and I would call Norman down to my office once in a while and say, "Norman, I don't have a clue what this means. Can you tell me?" And he would lead me through it. So I do some things like that once in a while, but one of our characteristics is we just take the Bible and we study it. And we try to figure out what it means. And the interesting thing is, as you grow and as you supposedly get stronger and learn more, you may read it differently at different times. There are some things I read now that I look at it and think, well, that's not how I thought it said before. And so that's part of growing. It's part of learning, and it's what makes this interesting, and it's what makes you able to go back to a book that you studied 2 years ago or 10 years ago, and you restudy it, and you find something brand new, and it's got freshness to it, and it comes alive for you. And we're going to start in verse 12 because it's always been something that has intrigued me. I don't know that I have any special insight, but the passage here has always intrigued me. Let's see if it does you. Dear friends, interesting how he addresses the people to whom he's writing. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering. Now, another translation might use what word? What kind of trial? Fiery trial that you are suffering. Now, before I go any farther, we're all on the same page, aren't we, in terms of our understanding that life comes with many trials? Is that true? I mean, just 2 Sundays ago, I talked about there are seasons in life where you might say it's harder than it is good. Anybody remember that? And I said it looked to me like when Jesus began his public ministry that you could say for the last 3.5 years of his life it was probably harder than it was good. He had all kinds of things coming against him that made life really, really hard. But even though we have good and we have bad, there are sometimes some trials that come upon us that they feel fiery, and they're certainly painful. And some of them we expect. So Karen has experienced this week the burial of her mother, and she was expecting that in a sense, because when your mother gets in her mid-90s or beyond, you expect that to happen, but when it happens, it always happens at a time when you didn't expect it. It always kind of comes, and it's difficult. And Janet has been overwhelmed, she and her sister both, of cleaning out her mother's house or apartment, and going through all kinds of things and separating all kinds of things, and then traveling back and forth to Corn, taking care of her mother who is slipping into maybe a little bit of dementia more rapidly than anyone thought that she would. It is a trial, is it not? And we have a rain situation again this spring, somewhat like it was last spring, very, very dry. And how many people in the agricultural world out here are feeling a pretty painful trial right now? Do you think some are? Yeah, and you're hearing some people say that even if mine gets insured out at almost a zero, it won't pay for how much I've got in the crop. because I put too much fertilizer in, or Greg Turner always tells me, farm to win, don't farm to lose. And so he believes in putting plenty of fertilizer and plenty of whatever. I think that's what he's telling me. And I tell Mitch, Greg says farm to win, and Mitch is saying, and what did you tell me? I mean, don't listen to that guy anymore. You know, how much we got in this crop. So everybody understands this. Don't be surprised at this painful or fiery trial you are suffering, as though, now this is the part I really, really like, as though some strange thing were happening to you. As though some strange thing were happening. These painful trials are not unusual. They're not unusual to the point that they are strange. They happen to everyone, or to all of us. No one gets to be exempt from this. And so if we had time and we wanted to just do an exercise, we could go around the room and we could talk to each person and say, give me one painful trial that you've experienced in the last 5 to 7 to 10 years. And it would probably be hard for you to pick just one, because there have been so many. You know, Jack would tell us about a trial, a painful trial. Pat would tell us about a painful trial. They're everywhere. It's not a strange thing.
Isn't this almost exactly what Jesus said, John? In this world you're going to have tribulation.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, again, the same thing.
That's exactly right. When we get a little farther in the Gospel of John, toward the end, Jesus is going to say, don't be surprised by this. In this world, you're going to have trouble. It's just the way it is. So, but now I want you to watch some of the things he says here. But rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ. Now that's a common statement in the New Testament. Paul will make that statement too. Understand, life was hard for Jesus. Now keep with me here. So that you may be overjoyed when His glory is revealed. You know, more and more I am hearing people say this statement. I've heard this statement more in the last few years than I've heard it any time in my life, at least that I can remember. People saying, I am anxious for Jesus to come again. I got a text from a lady that worked for me for about 20-something years today, and she just said, belated happy birthday. Marilyn, I know, has said for the last 20-something years, I can't wait for Jesus to come. Because Susan and I watched the young woman, 25 years old, with her chest torn apart, and them wanting to replace the lungs inside of her, and they couldn't get the lungs to fit because this little girl had cancer when she was 3, and they over-radiated her and watched that slow, painful death. And Marilyn is anxious for Jesus to come again. Everybody understand that? So you're going to be you're overjoyed when you see that glory revealed when Jesus comes. Now, wait a minute. If you were insulted, that's kind of how he says this. If you're insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. But if you suffer, it should not be as a murderer or a thief or any kind of criminal or even as a meddler. I found that so interesting. I mean, if you're going to suffer, let it be natural suffering. Let it be what happens to all of us. You know, if you're a murderer, you're probably going to what? You're probably going to get a bad deal happen to you. I mean, somebody's going to catch up with you. And if you're a thief, what's going to happen to you? You're probably going to get caught. Something's going to happen to you. Or if you're any other kind of, you get elected to the White House. If you're any kind of criminal, you're going to get in trouble. But why in the world does he talk about criminal and thief and murder and then talk about a meddler?
They don't have hope.
I'm going to tell you something. There were many of you meddling Sunday. You were getting to my business. I mean, well, I don't know who put my birthday on that thing, but you were meddling. You can have a birthday. How old are you? And one says again tonight, you're going to be 80. And I'm thinking, it's none of your business. You know, it was my mom and dad's business. You know. But to lump together this meddler thing with murder it just kind of shocks me, doesn't it you? But that's like Romans chapter 1, when he'll talk about murderer and then he'll talk about deceit, and you think, how could that be closely related? And yet, there it is. And I really think that we ought to be careful about this idea of meddling. You know why we ought to be careful about it? We tend to think we know about how to get in your world and fix your world when we what? We really don't know what your world's like. You understand that one? We really don't know. And if we really knew, we might take a different perspective of it. Do you think? I'm reminded once in a while of my own children. Don't meddle. We got this, Dad. Quit trying to fix everything, Dad. You know, we got it. So, anyway, I thought that was interesting. However, now here's where I really want to get to tonight, and I'm going to stop after this. If you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but praise God that you bear that name. What in the world could it mean if you suffer as a Christian? And I don't want to try to go back to the time when this was written and try to figure out who was the Roman emperor and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I've been studying more history lately to try to figure out what the history really is. But this is relevant for right now. If you suffer as a Christian, what could that mean?
Peter knows this intimately from Acts.
Okay. Yeah, Peter has been, a few years earlier than this, he suffered because he was a follower of Christ. He was put in jail, for example.
And they praised him when they came out because they were worthy to suffer for him.
And Peter will ultimately die because he's a Christian. But does it seem relevant to you that we hear this message today in 2023?
Yeah.
Does it seem relevant
Yeah.
in our country?
More so.
Because never before, as you trace back through the history, you see, this nation got formed. This nation got formed because some people got in England and they kind of got trapped in, and they were finally getting a Bible where they could read for themselves, but the King of England said, we're going to have a church that I'm the king of, and I'm going to do it this way. And some people read it this way, and people read it this way, and they say, we don't think this is right. And so they escaped. And they came to this country to be able to read this and approach it like they thought was right. And they built a country out of that thinking. And being a Christian was never something that was going to imprison you or have you flogged or whatever until now. Until now. And then we read here this week that the FBI or somebody like the FBI has been spying on the Catholic Church because of some of their particular teaching. And we saw a couple of weeks ago that a mentally deranged person walked into a private school and killed 6 people, and the media is blaming whom? Who's getting the blame for that? Christians. Christians are getting the blame because they're saying it would not have happened if Christians hadn't been so intolerant and so dogmatic and so whatever. And by the way, you know where that school moved to? You know that school closed? And the Church of Christ in Nashville said, "We take you. You just come and use our building until you find an appropriate place." And it was kind of interesting.
We're getting it here for the first time.
Right, that's my point.
England, Canada, they've jailed pastors for just street preaching.
Right.
And we've never experienced that here because we always taught the First Amendment, but there's a lot of people in charge now that they don't care about the First Amendment. If you offend me, that's enough to use the force of government to shut you up.
Well, look at how our country, when it originated, the colleges were built on Christian values. Look at Princeton, Yale, Harvard, all the great people of the time that came out of those. And now, like I said, it's just ironic.
That's exactly right. All the most elite schools in America were built because these Christian people said, we have learned the value of reading and writing. We've learned the value of being able to read the Bible for ourselves. We want our children to go to school. We want to go to college. And guess what? The primary study in those schools in that day was from this text. And today, if you say just the wrong word, you lose your job at any one of those schools. So my point is, if you suffer for being a Christian, it's kind of like we ought to fasten our seatbelt. If you're going to live this life of Christian, you ought to fasten your seatbelt because it's going to be what we call a bumpy ride. It's going to be a bumpy ride. And I will never forget an elder telling me one time, he was a medical doctor, he's retired now by a long time, but he said, you just wait. This country is going in a direction where there's going to become a time when everybody who wears the name Christian will huddle together in a little group and lock arms to survive against the forces that are going to come against us in this country. And I thought he was nuts. I thought, no, it's not going to happen. And now I'm beginning to see more and more the attacks. Because there is, now it's interesting, it's on both sides. If there is a mentality today, if you don't agree with me, you're not just wrong, you're an absolute what? You're an enemy. That's it. So our politics today, our politics in America is exactly that. If you don't agree with me, you are wrong and you are an enemy. And that's how we treat each other in politics. Wouldn't it be wonderful to bring back from the dead a Ronald Reagan who could say to a Tip O'Neill, when they were polar opposites, I think you and I can work together and find something good for this country. And then we have people with, and I'll just go ahead and say it, with ideologies around sexual identity. And if you don't agree with me, then you are absolutely wrong and you are my what? Enemy. That's the way this is working. And you have certain religious people who are saying, if you don't agree with me, you are wrong and you are my enemy. And in fact, Sunday morning, when we look at the end of John chapter 7, you're going to find the Pharisees saying to a few Jews who did believe in Jesus, you don't even know what you're talking about. Only we can really understand the law of Moses. Only we have the knowledge, and you don't have the knowledge. And I'm thinking, wow, they're doing the same thing you're seeing all over this country. Only I really know. And if you're not on my level and you don't agree with what I'm saying, you are my enemy. And so the road ahead appears to be a road where you're going to suffer simply because you are a Christian. because you're a Christian. But if you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but praise God that you bear his name. For it is time for judgment to begin with the family of God, and if it begins with us, what will the outcome be for those who do not obey the gospel of God? In other words, that's a hard thing to read for me. My mind doesn't just kind of flow through that meaning of that. But it's similar to other passages where God says, don't worry, I'm going to judge all this. I'm going to make every wrong right. And for those who are refusing to be Christians and they're doing all this harm, hold on. I will be the judge. I'll deal with it. And so we sit in the basket of injustice, and we see so much injustice or injustice going on in our world, and I get so disgusted with it. But then I know I may not be able to fix it, I may not be able to help it, and I can scream to the top of my voice and no one may hear it. But guess what? Someday God's going to take care of that. And they're going to wish, oh, how they're going to wish that they'd not done that. Because as we said Sunday, there's going to come a time when at the feet of Jesus, every knee is what? Going to bow, and every tongue is going to confess that he's what? Lord. And if you wait too long, that's going to be an unpleasant thing to have to say, because it's going to mean really bad stuff. Everybody can see that? Isn't it a relevant passage? For those of you who are meddlers, wasn't it relevant? And for those of you who are Christian, we suffer. So everybody got the idea?